Antonella Marty, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Well, Antonella, you are working, I think the best way I can describe it is you are working for freedom in Latin America. You're involved in a whole bunch of networks, essentially across the entire region. Tell me, before we talk about Cuba, which is what a lot of us have been thinking about lately, just tell me in general about your work and what you do.
Okay, so I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Latin America at Atlas Network. This is an organization that has been working all over the world for more than 40 years promoting economic freedom, political freedom, individual liberties, rule of law, equality before the law, all the importance of these aspects that we really need right now in Latin America, right? I keep, defending and promoting these ideas all over Latin America, traveling to, different countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Ecuador, Peru, and of course in Argentina.
Well, so why don't you tell me now, we've heard all sorts of things about Cuba. There were even things said that these people in Cuba were protesting, COVID or something like this. And of course, the general consensus that came out is that these people were looking for freedom, right, in a situation that clearly there's a huge lack of. But why don't you tell me briefly what you're hearing on the ground from Cuba? Things have changed, obviously, very quickly, but also what this whole movement was about from your vantage point.
So this movement is called San Isidro. They're a group of artists and people who want to promote liberty in the island, in Cuba. And I think that's very important because we see this regime operating on the island for more than 62 years. That's more than half a century. And then when we hear, for example, people from and political parties from the left talking about democracy because they love talking about democracy, and then they go and support this kind of dictatorships, there you see the hypocrisy that we can see from this kind of supporters and from the socialists and the communists and the Marxists. But in Cuba right now we can see a rise of a movement that wants freedom, that really wants freedom. They just want to get rid of that regime that has been operating the island for more than 62 years, And this is not about COVID. The COVID-19 crisis, that situation has increased, all the problems, but they have been, having all these problems for more than 62 years. But we can see protesters and people, asking for freedom in Cuba, not only inside the island, but also outside the island. We see many protests in for example, in Spain, in Argentina, even in Venezuela. We saw many people protesting for freedom in Cuba. So it's a very complicated situation right now because the regime imprisons anyone who talks about freedom, anyone who want to oppose the system. And as we know, this regime learned everything from the Soviet Union. So they know how to silence people. They know, they have the handbook for, keep with this terrible dictatorship.
So you visited Cuba some time ago, but I actually you visited Venezuela from what I understand as well. I'm kind of, surprised, I guess to some extent, that someone doing the work that you're doing would be able to do that and frankly would go and do it, kind of knowing a little bit about how totalitarian regimes work, right?
Well, to Cuba, I cannot go back. I cannot go back to Cuba, not anymore, because after I left the island on that trip, that I went to visit the opposition leaders, the ladies in white, and many people that promote the ideas of liberty, or at least they try to promote the ideas of liberty from inside the island. But the regime released like a letter that I wasn't able to come back to Cuba because I violated the visa and because I was a CIA agent and all these crazy things that they say, of course. But yeah, I filmed a documentary in the island. I talked to many people. I tried to see, I went to a bookstore. It's very difficult to find a bookstore in Cuba, and I found only one in the center of Havana, and I didn't see any books from the last 30 years. and everything I saw, it was just about communism, about Fidel Castro, about Che Guevara, and it's a very complicated situation. And then I went to visit the Ladies in White. This is a group of women from 20 to 80 years old that promote liberty, and they ask for freedom in the island, and they ask for the release of the political prisoners in Cuba, and they protest dressed in white and in a very pacific way, and the regime brutally beats them. And I went to visit the Ladies in White, and when I was inside the house, they told me, they were like, Antonella, you know that anything we're talking right now, they know it because the house is full of microphones, so they know what we're talking about. So when you go out, just walk as fast as you can and try to see how you can make it. And when you experience that, we can always talk about communism and how bad communism is, but when you experience communism, you see that it's even bigger than what we can imagine. And I went to Venezuela a few times. I went to there are like just a little radio stations because the regime in Venezuela has also repressed the liberty of expression. And I went to different radio shows, and they were like, before going live, they were like, okay, Antonella, please don't mention this person, don't talk about this. And when you have to exercise the self-censorship, that's one of the most complicated things in the world. And I lived that for like a week that I was in Venezuela, or the week that I was in Cuba. I can imagine how difficult it is to live under that system all your life. So I always say that in communism, you don't live, you just survive.
Well, so it's very interesting. This is something that I've actually been speaking. My parents escaped from communist Poland in the 70s. Very familiar with the system. And I saw this film. I think it came, I lose track of the passage of time, but there was this film called The Lives of Others. I don't know if you've come across this, of course. But so this was one film that kind of I felt was able to kind of transmit to people that grow up in a free society and have no idea what it would be like to know that, our conversation right now is being monitored and someone's recording it and it's going into a dossier. Or maybe it is, maybe it's not, maybe it is. And that can be used against me at any point, and how that changes how people actually behave with one another. What does trust mean even? Who can you trust? It's a completely different world, right?
Yes, and that's why when we talk about liberty, that's the opposite of this kind of regimes. Because when you talk about liberty, it's all about trust. Free markets, it's all about trust. And when you talk about protectionism, communism, socialism, aestheticism, collectivism, any kind of collectivism, people don't trust each other because they are in this permanent situation of being under surveillance, and they are afraid of anyone because they don't trust, because you never know who can be part of the regime and who can tell the regime that you are a free thinker or that you think different from that idea of the communist system. That's why I like so much the idea of open and free societies, because they are based on that cooperation, voluntary cooperation, and about trust. It's all about trust.
Well, and we're seeing a kind of I think in many countries around the world, even some of the most democratic countries, especially under COVID, right? We've seen a lot of activity, let's just say, right, that kind of fits more into the bucket of lack of trust, let's say, as you've been describing. So what do you make of this? And certainly in your home country of Argentina as well.
Well, Argentina, with all this situation, right now we are in phase one, basically, with the COVID-19 situation, because the government and many governments in Latin America, they found the COVID-19 situation a perfect justification or strategy for them to keep promoting populism and to keep growing the size of the government. So they just go for security. They just go for more security, more state, more surveillance, more government controlling your life and telling you what to do because they own you. right? And I mean, that's not the solution. That's never the solution to any problem. I mean, I always say that the solution is always liberty and responsibility, because you have to be responsible for your actions and for everything you do. So Argentina is a very complicated right now, and I always say that we did everything backwards, because we used to be a developed country, and now we are a country that, you know, is underdeveloped, and we are a very poor country with high rates of inflation. For example, if you want to at some point see the size or understand the size of the government in Argentina, we are 45 million people in Argentina, 45 million citizens, and 25 million people in Argentina receive money from the state. That's more than, you know, that's basically the half of the country receiving money from the government. And we have to remember from where the government takes that money that they give, right? It's always from you, because it's taxpayers' money. But then you see those 25 million people, and then you see only 7 million people working at the private sector. And you have 7 million people trying to, you know, make other people, 25 million people, live, right? Because they pay for them, because they pay with taxes for them. And we have this huge size of the government, and if we don't stop that, I mean, we're going to keep, you know, destroying the economy, destroying a country that at one time was prosperous, just like Cuba, just like Venezuela. We used to have, you know, huge indexes of economic growth, and right now we are just poor, because we choose bad ideas, and bad ideas have bad consequences.